Hey, you guys. I don't have any slides. I don't have any PowerPoint. I've been real busy the last few days offending women, and that takes up a lot of time, so I apologize. But really quickly, I wanted to say, before I jump into my talk, my mom is watching on GameSpot, and everybody says, well, Jaffe, you cuss a lot. And she says to me before I get off the phone with her, she says, well, watch your language. And I said, well, you taught me. I grew up she cusses like a sailor. So if you guys would do me a huge favor, she's 80 years old, living in Alabama. Could you guys on 3 please say, hi, Bobby? She would get the biggest fucking kick out of this. So I'm going to count to 3. If you would indulge me, I would appreciate it. So here we go. 1, it's hi, Bobby. I don't know why she's called Bobby. That's not a real name. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Hi, Bobby. I'll tell y'all just made an old lady orgasm. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. So now my talk, I gotta get water. I'm supposed to have water. My talk is, actually, can I get water just from whenever they get a chance? So my talk is actually a warning about why we shouldn't tell stories with our video games. I think it's a bad idea. I think it's a waste of resources and time and money, and I think, thanks so much. And more importantly, I think it actually stunts and has stunted over the last 10 years or so the medium of video games, sort of at our own peril. And to be clear, I'm not talking about player-authored stories. And if you don't know what that means, it's kind of a buzzword these days amongst designers. But basically, a player-to-author story is something, the best example these days is, Skyrim and Arkham City are wonderful, but you can also go down the chain of sort of scope to a game like Angry Birds. A player-authored story is basically where the mechanics and the interactive is so compelling and so engaging that the player, by the very nature of playing the game, creates a narrative in his mind. His play session is the story that he has created. And sometimes that gets shared on the internet. Sometimes, if you play a game like Skyrim, I believe you literally can, over the course of a weekend, create a novel-sized tome like Game of Thrones, literally of that quality sometimes. But even if you play like Where's My Water, it really is sort of whether you share it with friends or share it in your head, or even if you're not conscious of it. I think those kinds of stories are the heartbeat of our medium, and they are to be protected and supported and applauded. They're wonderful. And also, a lot of people hear me say this and they think I'm talking about a return to sort of old school Atari 2600 days, sort of abstract visuals and pure play mechanics. And I'm not talking about that either. I'm a huge believer in IP. I'm a huge believer in, I think our industry actually, I'm amazed every year when I look at the games we make, and I realize I think that our industry is probably the best and most vibrant IP creation medium that's working today in terms of the characters we create, the worlds we create for us to explore, for players to explore, and the context, and the stories, and the cutscenes. I'm not opposed to any of these things. I think when they serve as a nest to sort of protect and to house the actual gameplay. In fact, I think you really shouldn't be making a game, no matter the scope, if you don't have an IP, because it's important for branding, but more importantly, or maybe it's really the same thing, it really is the first way that a consumer or a gamer connects emotionally with the product. So I absolutely am a big believer in IP. I'm talking about games, 2 things. I'm talking about games that have been intentionally made from the ground up, from the design document or the log line up, with the intent purpose of telling a story or expressing a philosophy or giving the player a designer's narrative. And that can sometimes be the entire game, or that can sometimes be a brilliant game like Arkham City, which is I struggled when I was voting this year between Arkham City and Skyrim, where even a game that is filled with opportunities for player authorship sometimes goes a little bit, in my opinion, off the rails and forces you into an area of storytelling but not game playing. And I'll give you a really good example, at least, that worked for me or didn't work for me, that illustrates this point. So if you've played it, and I imagine everybody in this room has played that amazing game, the opening of the game is, if I remember correctly, you're Bruce Wayne. You've been chained up. You're a prisoner. You're being sent to Arkham City, which is Arkham, or which is Gotham, but it's been turned into the story. So he's being led through. It's beautifully executed, beautiful art, and you're chained up, so you can't do anything. So all you really can do with the controller is look up, down, left, and right. And the story is being told, and it's, in my opinion, it's probably was done in the service of the story, which is a great story. But I feel that in that case, we lost, or I didn't make the fucking game, but I mean, we as game developers, but they lost sight of the gamer mentality of what they bring to a game and what they want from a game, and they let the desire to tell a story take over. Because ultimately, if you're thinking at it at a pure mechanics level, it's really not a lot of fun. You get home, you spent $60, hopefully, not a bucket fucking Redbox, and you spend $60 on this thing, and you get home and you sit down and you go through all this stuff and you play it, and you're like, all you can do is this, 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 and this. Now, a design argument can be made, well, because right afterwards, Bruce Wayne breaks out of the chains and now he can fight. And you could argue, well, yeah, but dude, we did that because when the chains broke, we wanted you to have a gameplay sense of, of sort of all this ability rushing at you. And I could appreciate the argument, but I think a stronger probability is that that was just a good story setup and they gave you a little bit of interactivity. And I think it came at the expense of the opening of that game, which then, crazily enough, is filled with brilliant, amazing opportunities for player authorship and wonderful in-game storytelling. So now, look, there's a lot of people who will tell you I'm crazy. Again, not just my mom is watching on GameSpot. I guarantee you the comments are filling up. Jaffe's a fucking idiot, right? Because there's a vocal community, and I don't know how big they are, on the other side of this argument that will tell you cinematic storytelling and gameplay, that is the future. And that's why I call this chocolate and tuna fish. Because a lot of people think it's chocolate and peanut butter. They think, oh, take the movies and games and mush them together and suddenly we've got the next big thing. But I do think it is chocolate and tuna fish. They don't fit. I don't think they fit. And I know there's a great book I'm sure some of you guys have read called Reinventing Comics by Scott McCloud. And in that book, he talks about, well, there's a panel actually of a guy, Rube Goldberg, who if you've watched The Goonies or you played The Incredible Machine, he's the cartoonist who really kind of, pioneered this sort of, machine creation cartoons and sort of, that was what he was famous for. And there was a very similar conference to this for cartoonists back in the day. And this cartoonist came up to him in this panel, but this was history, and was talking about how I feel comics they can tell stories, they can express philosophy, they can resonate. And Goldberg was like, comics are not jokes, they're vaudeville. You're insane, don't waste your time, don't waste your life. And you never want to be the Rube Goldberg of this argument, because it's, you don't want to be on the wrong side of things. And I got into games because I wanted to merge movies and games. I thought there was a great opportunity to do that. And, but ultimately, I started to realize that it didn't work. And I'll tell you why I don't think it works first. And then I'll tell you why I think it's dangerous. I don't think it works because the first kind of hint of this for me was a short story teacher I had about 15 years ago. And she said something that I thought that always stuck with me. And she said that even a good story, a story that simply works, is one where you can, it's a self-help book. And it doesn't mean it's a self-help book like you buy at a bookstore, and it doesn't even mean the reader shouldn't be aware they're reading a self-help story. But it's a story in which you can sort of recognize your own humanity and get sort of tools for living your life. So if you think of Indiana Jones, it's certainly not a self-help movie, but he or Rocky is a character that we recognize our own vulnerability in, but we also recognize the tenacity and the value of getting back up when you've been knocked down. You watch that movie or you watch a film like Terms of Endearment or Revolutionary Road, something that's very sad or tragic, and even though you haven't necessarily had those experiences, the nature of watching that film feeds your ability to say, hey, I'm not alone in the sadness in my life. And it gives you that energy to go back into the world. And to me, it's almost like life is a freeway. And when you're living your life, it's akin to a simulation. Games are simulations. So if you get off the freeway to watch a movie or to watch a show or to read a book, you're sort of kind of taking a pit stop from life and sort of digesting this stuff. And you're bringing this stuff into your life. And then you get back into life and you use this on an unconscious level in most cases to make your life better. But when you're playing a game, I think it is more like living life. It's not like watching a story, right? So if you are playing a game or living your life, it's like, how do I go to the store and get all the ingredients I need to make the cake? Or how do I do what I need to do to put myself politically in the right position to get this promotion? Or how do I get this girl to go out with me, right? How do I do all these things? It's very similar to resource management, spatial relation, interpersonal politics, trying to figure out, I have these three objects, how do I get up to that cliff over there if I'm Lara Croft or something like that? The brain is doing in those cases, I think it's much more similar, if not exactly to what the brain is doing when you are living your life. And I think that's why that kind of pushing story language into life or into games, which to me it's the same thing, I don't think the brain really distinguishes, I think is problematic and it doesn't work. And I'll give you another example is, when you listen to Steven Spielberg, who's one of my favorite movie makers, talk about Private Ryan, he talks about the Normandy scene, which is very famous, obviously. And he says, I didn't want to use a dolly, I didn't want to use a crane, I didn't want to have any music from John Williams, I just wanted it to be, guerrilla-style filmmaking, almost like, the documentarians were back in the day filming this for the newsreels, so it would be the closest to sort of putting you like you were actually on the beach. But even with that desire, it's not anywhere close to the same. And it's not anywhere close to the same because you just have this, by the nature of watching it, the very nature of watching it, and the very nature of a director making choices, and the nature of you having historical context of not just World War II, but your own life. You have this sort of omniscience, this sort of, to get all Eckhart Tolle-ish, you have this kind of isness of the situation, and you're kind of above it, and you're aware of it. And you have enough brain ability to sort of take in the lessons of it and the morals of it and the emotion of it. But if you actually imagine yourself at D-Day, you're probably not thinking about anything other than how the fuck do I get to that rock? If somebody came into this room right now and started spraying gunfire with an Uzi, we might think about our kids, we might think about our spouses, we might think about a lot of things, but the primary thing we're gonna think about is how the fuck do I get to the exit and how do I get out of here? And to me, that is how you think if you're playing a good game where they've made you actually care about your life, whether at a meta level or a moment-to-moment level. And so I think, to me, when I realized that, it was sort of the beginning of going, this really doesn't work. But then it became even more important for me to question, why do I want it to work in the first place? Why, and not just me, but why are so many of us on this path to care that games can be more? And I'll talk about the more in a minute, but I want to talk about why I think this started. So if you go back, and it's kind of debatable, but I think they say the first game was about 4,000, 5,000 years ago. Some people say it was Parcheesi, but I think it's earlier than Parcheesi. But let's just agree that it was millennia ago was the first recorded game that was created. And all up through millennia, you don't see the guys who made, or the people who created poker or bowling, or the people who said, hey, we have to every couple of years change the rules in the NFL in order to make the game, adjust the game for modern times or what have you. None of them are saying, hey, you know what, let's make a field goal worth 4 points because that's a reflection of the human condition. They're doing it because it makes the game better. It makes the game more competitive. It makes it more fun to watch, which is ultimately better business. And it makes it just simply a better game. And so I started thinking, where did this come from? You don't have a history of people making games all these years trying to bring drama and human emotion to games, other than the fact that when you play a game, there's human emotion in the nature of playing it. And I think it started in the the early 90s, really when I started getting into games, and it started with two things that happened around there. One was CD-ROM, which was shipping games on CD-ROM, and that gave us two things. It gave us really elaborate cutscenes, and if you were lucky, it gave you professional voice actors to do voices for your characters, and if you weren't lucky, they were shitty actors, but you still had VO in your games for the first time. So we were starting to see more cinematic trappings in our games. At the same time, you were seeing consumer-based 3D, whether it was the first PlayStation or whether it was like Alone in the Dark on the PC and early 3D graphics cards, and suddenly we could detach our camera from that 2D side-scrolling plane of Mario, or from the isometric view of Jungle Strike, or Crusader No Remorse, or the top-down locked view of Ultima, and suddenly we had all these beautiful cinematic camera angles, not just in the cutscenes, but in the actual real time. And I think we found ourselves kind of, seduced by the language of film and the power of the language of film, and sort of going down this road that we were sort of surrounded by the trappings of this, and we started to think that the expectations of film we started to put on games, and because they looked like movies and they were starting to feel like movies, we thought they needed to provide the same experience as movies. And in that, I think we lost a lot of sort of fundamentals of what makes the medium special. Now, again, people disagree with me, and they'll disagree with me real hardcore. Like, there was this lady, I really like her, she's great, I get excited to get behind the podium, but I wrote all this, yeah, whatever. I'm just now self-conscious about where I walk, and I'm just gonna stand here. So she wrote this great book called Smart Bomb, and she was at GDC. It's always GDC or EGM. I love EGM, but they print articles about this, or on the internet, ad nauseum, about, oh, games should be more, and developers are stunted adolescents, is what she said, and you guys should be making games about the human condition and politics, and why do movies do this, and where's your Citizen Kane, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you know what? I say that's fucking bullshit, and I'll tell you why it's bullshit. I have the front line. I worked for and with Sony for 16, 17 years. Sony innovates in a lot of ways, okay? But one of the ways, in '95, I remember being at the first E3 and seeing some of the logos and the promos for PS1, and it was all about how this is the new art form, this is the new medium. And they take that shit seriously, and here's how I know it, because this is the company that published and supported Parappa, and Heavy Rain, and Eco, and Shadow of the Colossus, and Flow, and Flower, and Journey. And when I was at Sony Santa Monica, we were the studio that initially greenlit and supported for a long time LA Noire. And we were also the studio that supported 6 Days in Fallujah, which, if you don't know, was supposed to be sort of the world's first documentary video game that was really about war, but it was supposed to be emotional and more of a genuine sense of what it meant. It was a more important game. And some of those games that I just mentioned are brilliant games. There's no doubt. Only a fucking fool would look at Eco and say it's not a brilliant game. But I will tell you something that you're going to think, why are you talking about yourself, Jaffe? I'll explain in a second. But let me tell you something about myself. I cry at almost everything, okay? So I cry. There's a commercial every Christmas where the mom takes the cookies out of the oven and the narrator says, I'm gonna cry right now because I'm thinking about it. You know, she says, childhood quickly slips away. I have these little fucking kids. Don't fuck you all. I can't help it, okay? But she says, because I have little kids and I love them so much, and it's like, God, that makes me so sad. And Hallmark cards make me cry. And I love political debates, right? I love in real life, or I adored The West Wing, or I love Meet the Press, and I love listening to people talk about philosophy. So the point I'm sharing this with you is because I am open to receive. I am susceptible to media. Okay, it's not like I'm some cynic asshole who, fuck, I'm not gonna cry at terms of endearment. It's not that. I love that stuff. I love being affected by media. And I'm like, well, if a guy like me is so open to this, why in the world are these amazing games, some of which that I just mentioned from Sony, that I was on the front lines on some of these, watching these be made, these amazing games be made, as much as I love them, why are they only evoking emotion and storytelling 1/50th, 1/100th of the fucking cookie commercial that airs every Christmas? Doesn't mean they're not brilliant games, but there was something weird about that. And it started me thinking, even more, it's like, how much of an ego portion is this on the part of us as game makers? Why do we feel the need to do this? It's like, this is what was the clincher for me, which was I said, a lot of these people will say, well, I have something to say. I have a story I have to tell. And I started thinking, it's like, you know what, if you got something inside of you that's so powerful, like a story you've got to express, or a narrative you have to share, or a philosophy about man's place in the universe that you want to get out to the world, why in the fuck, and I use that term, mom, wherever you are, intentionally, why in the fuck would you choose the medium that has historically continually been the worst medium to express philosophy and story and narrative? Why wouldn't you write a book? Why wouldn't you make a movie? Why wouldn't you go on a blog and express on a political, why wouldn't you run for fucking office? But instead, to me, it's the equivalent of being one of the world's best chefs, and instead of working at a 4 or 5 star restaurant, you choose to sort of ply your trade at McDonald's. It doesn't make any sense. And that's when I started thinking there's got to be something more. And I get it because I came into it with this same intent, the same desire. There's an ego part of it. There's a desire of all people to want to express ourselves and to be important and to be relevant, and to, especially when you're compared to the movies all the time, because the movies are not just a powerful medium, but the behind the scenes shit is glamorous. I'm not saying that's everybody in this room or every developer or every gamer. I can tell you I was susceptible to it. You watch the sort of behind the scenes stuff and fuck, I want to be, they paint those guys to be really important. They have something to say. It's all bullshit. We know that now. If we've been in this industry, it's all PR. But ultimately, you kind of buy into that. And so I get that. But then it struck me, I got kind of frustrated because I said, we are important. We're extremely important. I mean, if you look at the biggest successes of this medium, it's not the story-based stuff. It's Modern Warfare multiplayer, which is a global phenomenon. It is Skyrim, it is Guitar Hero, it is Angry Birds, it is Madden, it is the stuff that embraces what makes the medium special. And when you actually think about that, and you think about how fucking disrespectful we are to what we give to the world, it gets you a little angry because we do noble work. We are saying important things. We're entertaining the world, and it drives me fucking crazy that we chase after this need to be more, according to these, GDC folks, when I think we're already so much. And people will say, well, Jaffe, why does it matter to you personally? And it matters to me because, they're like, well, you got to make Twisted Metal. Twisted Metal is a pure mechanics game. It's pure gameplay for the most part. And I get it. I'm not sitting here saying no one should ever go off and try to expand the medium. They should, all the time. I think that's wonderful. And if someone really thinks they want to do this, then they should go do it. But I think we need to adjust our thoughts. I think we need to change how we think about what this medium is and sort of get off the path of this is movies or this is the next generation of the storytelling and get back to these are games. And in doing so, or we haven't done so, we've kind of let the gameplay muscle atrophy and we've let our skills and abilities in our evolving the actual medium that makes this medium special, I think we've let it go. And I think it matters also more so. I know it's not just developers here, but it's executives. It matters almost more to the executives than it does to us developers because you guys need to get a bullshit filter. And you need to get one before you waste any more money, okay? Because here's the deal. It is real easy to bamboozle y'all. It is so fucking easy to sit in a pitch and talk about, I want the realism and the grittiness of Breaking Bad and Sons of Anarchy, and I want to put it on a spaceship, and I want to make it feel like Tarantino, and I want to speak to the human condition, and you walk out of that meeting and you've given them a green light and you feel like, yeah, you can fucking see that in your head. But you can't fucking see the game in your head. You can see a trailer to a movie that doesn't actually exist. And you better start learning gameplay language. I mean, I don't want to say better, like, oh, you're going to die, but I think it's good if you learn gameplay language because then you can do one of two things. You can either, and it doesn't have to be mean-spirited, I would never want that, but you can then actually sit with the developer who's saying this and saying, okay, you know what? That's cool that you want to do that. Tell me how. Explain to me, unless the goal is just the IP, like I look at a game like Assassin's Creed, which I really like, it's like, you know, if you're coming in as a developer going, look, we get that the gameplay is this, the IP is this, we'd love to merge them where we can, but you know, if you come in with a cognizance and awareness of actually what the product you're making, great. And if you're an executive that knows how to suss that out and ask that, that's great. But what you don't want to do is have a developer who doesn't fucking know how they're going to do this, and they kind of, romance you with the promise of something more than it ever will be, or not more. I even slipped into it, right? It's not more, but different than it ever will be, and then it ends up not being that. I think that's really dangerous. And the last thing I'll say on this is, I think the guy who really has it right, and I think he's one of the smartest designers working in games, is Harvey Smith, and he did Deus Ex, which is one of my favorite games. And it basically really speaks to player authorship and stories via gameplay. And the guy just wrote a novel. And he's also making a very heavily player-to-author game right now. And here's a guy who I think gets this medium is good for this medium is good for that, and play to the strengths of the medium. And basically, I think we need to understand the medium, we need to play to the strengths of the medium, and in doing so, we'll make much better games and we'll make players a lot happier. And that's my talk, so thank you. And if you... I'm happy, I don't know if you have any, why you would have questions about that, but if you do, I'm happy to answer them. Anybody? I can't see anything, so I'm assuming the answer is no. So thank you guys very much. I'll see you guys tonight at the awards. Thanks a lot.